Bundaberg is a city with a population of just over 70,000 people. Situated on the Burnett River, nearly 10 miles from the coast and 240 miles north of Brisbane. A number of early settlers established timber as the first industry, but as a result of the incentive of the sugar and coffee regulations of 1864, sugar became the major component in Bundaberg development from the 1870s. One of the most famous people from Bundaberg was the aviator Bert Hinkler. We are passing his statue as we walk across the bridge over the Burnett River to have a look around the Hinkler Hall of Aviation. Bert was born in Bundaberg in 1892. From his late teens he built and flew 2 gliders on the beaches near his hometown. In 1914 he left for England, where he worked for the Sopwith Aviation Company. A few months later he enlisted in the Royal Naval Air Service, where he served as a gunner and observer, then later as a pilot. After the war he worked as a test pilot for the aircraft manufacturer Aviro in Southampton. In 1920 he flew a 35 horsepower Avro Baby non-stop from London to Turin, then shipped the plane back to Australia, where he flew it from Sydney to Bundaberg, which was 850 miles, a long distance record breaking flight at the time of 8.5 hours. The plane, however, was damaged on its return flight. In 1927 he made a major long distance flight in Avro Avion to Latvia. The following year was his most renowned achievement, a pioneering solo flight in Avro Avion from England to Australia. He left England on the 7th of February 1928 and arrived in Darwin on the 22nd of February 1928. He began construction of his dream machine, the Ibis Amphibian, but he had to abandon the project due to lack of interest and the start of the Great Depression. In 1931 he purchased an English-built de Havilland Pusmoth, which he flew from Canada to New York, then non-stop to Jamaica, which was 1,500 miles, then to Venezuela, Guyana, Brazil. From there he went across the South Atlantic to Africa. From West Africa he flew to London. This became the first solo flight across the South Atlantic. He was only the second person to cross the Atlantic solo after Charles Lindbergh. In 1933 Bert Hinkler was to make his final journey. Departing from London for Australia, but on April the 27th he crashed in the Alps in Italy and died at the age of 40. He was honoured with a state funeral in Italy and his remains were laid to rest in Florence. This is Bert Hinkler's original house from Southampton in England. It was to be demolished in England in the 1980s to make way for a housing development. So the funding was organised to dismantle the house brick by brick, transport the materials and rebuild the house here in Bundaberg in 1983. This is only the second time that this has been done in Australia. The other being Captain James Cook's cottage that was reassembled in the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne. Hinkler's House and the Hall of Aviation both lie in the Botanic Gardens. We've got an ash storm. We've had this the night before last. The boat was covered in this black ash, very fine ash. We were told it's from burning off. Get some nice and fruits.
Have you got enough food there, Paul?
I'll probably have to go for seconds and dessert afterwards. Thank you, Leah.
In January 2013, Bundaberg experienced its worst flooding in recorded history as a result of Cyclone Oswald. Floodwaters peaked at 9 metres. Over 4,000 properties and 600 businesses had been affected by the floodwaters, which moved in excess of 15 knots. 2 Defence Force Black Hawk helicopters were brought in from Townsville as part of the evacuation operation, which ultimately used an additional 14 aircraft.
The marina in town, which is called Midtown Marina, it was swept away. It still operates as a business, and this is where we learnt of the fate of our previous boat. Our old boat was called Isis 3. She was a 10-metre steel sloop, which we sold in 2004 after owning her for about 10 years. So chatting to the lady who worked at the marina, she told us that Isis was swept away along with dozens of other boats in the floods. Her new owner Ron and his dog, who were on the boat at the time, were airlifted off the boat's deck before she sank on the banks of the river, which was a very sad ending.